We're little chunksters.
Hey everybody, it's Dick here. This is another video of our winter Scotland motorcycle tour, specifically the 27 miles from Inverglass to Cranlarich at the northwestern edge of Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. Still in the third day of our trip, it remained slow going. As we gained elevation, the temperature dropped considerably. All of the vegetation on the other side of the road was sheathed in ice. We weren't sure whether it was from frozen rain or a type of frost we had yet to experience. The road surface was slick, but unexpected high-speed traffic warmed it enough to make it passable on the bike as long as we were cautious. Our helmets were filled with the mist of our warm breath, making it impossible to see through our visors, but the cold air was painful against our faces despite the neck warmers and masks that we were wearing. I had to try and wipe the inside of my visor clear periodically to see anything. The weather and the cold also proved challenging to our electronics, and we started to see the first of the trip's cascade of electrical failures on this stretch of road. For a bit of context and hopefully of interest to you fine viewers, I'll catalog our communications and video equipment before describing how each one ended up failing on us. Firstly, Shakedown and I were using our Sena 20S intercom systems. We had used them before on a 4,000-mile tour to Newfoundland a number of years ago, and they, despite the usual growing pains of learning a new device, worked pretty well. What we didn't consider for this trip was how they'd perform in the cold, and despite riding through some considerable rain and poor conditions on the last tour, the odd winter humidity we were experiencing in Scotland was having a negative impact on our devices. I chalked it up to the idiosyncrasies of radio communications rather than any fault of some kind. I was wrong, but I'll talk more on that later. Meow. In an attempt to record our voices, we used the Sena GoPro backpack. On our previous trip, we used one backpack, but it failed to record both of our voices. There was little information in the instruction booklet or online as to why this was the case, and after speaking to a Sena rep at the time, they were unable to provide an explanation, insisting that both riders needed their own individual backpack device. For this trip, I equipped each of us with a backpack device as advised. This proved unnecessary. When upon reviewing the footage, I discovered that only one of the backpacks ended up recording both of our voices. I was pissed to have spent the money on the expensive second device, and that the device didn't work as expected on our first trip. I spoke with Sena again after the Scotland trip, and the rep this time was also unable to provide an explanation. I assume that the backpack recording both devices came down to the firmware update I performed before departing for Scotland. The additional backpack device created yet another problem, however. Sena devices are extremely capable, offering the ability to connect the user to multiple rider intercoms, GPS units, mobile phones, FM radio, and the like. However, the Sena software requires a savant-like understanding of its architecture. Each device needs to be connected in a specific, albeit secret, sequence. If the devices are connected out of order, some or all of them will disconnect without the user's knowledge. I say without user knowledge because, other than not hearing the other rider with regards to the intercom system, there's no indication that the devices are not functioning properly. Lights are blinking and there isn't any audio warning or command that anything has been disconnected. In the case of audio recording to the GoPro, you don't know it's malfunctioning until reviewing the footage much later. Annoying. It was for this reason, as well as a sense of adventure and discovery, that I was not connecting my mobile phone or GPS to the Sena headset. All of this was underscored by the periodic and inexplicable random disconnections that occurred along the way anyway. Add to all of these considerations the fact that our batteries did not like the extreme cold that we put them in. Our fresh and fully charged batteries were dying as fast as we could replace them. Not generally a problem for cameras, which have replaceable batteries, of which I carry an abundance, but the Sena backpacks have soldered-in internal batteries which require a mains lead to recharge. Again, none of these failures are noticeable or communicated to the user until a visual inspection when stopped or a playback can be conducted, and that's too late to remedy any of these problems. It's frustrating the amount of content that is lost in this fashion. I mention all of this to explain why along this road, when we were finally reaching the foothills of the Highlands and getting well into our adventure, we have no audio nor any footage from Shakedown's camera. Nevertheless, we pressed north. I'm pretty sure we were both still hearing each other at this point because I remember being very annoying to Shakedown regarding the mountains that we were spotting along the way. I knew at some point in the day we were meant to see Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in the UK. Not following a GPS and having never been there, every mountain with any geographical prominence, which I saw, I identified identified as Ben Nevis. Naturally, as we progressed further north, the mountains grew taller, and thus I identified each successive one incorrectly as Ben Nevis. I did this for most of the morning. Now, in my defense, I was overly excited. As it was, we were nearly 2 hours and some 70 miles from Fort William and Ben Nevis, so you could imagine how annoying it had gotten for Shakedown. We had a misguided expectation that as the day progressed, the frost would melt, the roads would warm, and we would make some good time into the Highlands. The reality proved very different, as not only did more frost and ice spread across the landscape, so did our bikes and riding gear accumulate thicker and thicker layers of the white stuff. Luckily, our heated gear kept us nice and warm. In actuality, every bit of our gear besides our mist-filled helmets performed excellently. Not relying on a GPS device for navigation was fun, and it reminded me of the road trips I took with Shakedown and my wife Fanny back in university. Referencing paper maps has its own appeal, and trying to remember the route while astride a motorbike has its own challenges, leading to the inevitable merry-go-round on the occasional roundabout. Not so fun on sketchy, icy roads, but amusing nonetheless. I particularly remember this roundabout, trying not to crash while laughing at Shakedown's admonishment of my wrong turn. I think we took that roundabout at between 9 and 13 miles an hour, which wasn't all that much slower than the rest of the ride that morning. Despite the unease of the slick roads, the scenery kept delivering more and more desolate wonder. Dropping down into cloud-covered valleys was always a favorite of mine. Defender. Shakedown made a habit of calling out every defender that we saw in Scotland. The distinction between them was whether or not it was a local or a farmer's defender, or whether it was a posh Chelsea tractor-style defender. It was kind of interesting how we cataloged each of them, and even when I missed spotting one, Shakedown always picked up the slack. What I found interesting about riding in Scotland was the unpredictability of the weather. I had no doubt that we would have more snow and frost at the higher elevations, but I thought that dropping down into valleys we'd get a respite from the extreme cold or the freezing temperatures. But really what was happening was in the valleys we were getting these pockets of cold air that were at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit lower than what we were experiencing at the higher elevations. It was really odd, and it made the roads that much slicker, especially on curves and roundabouts. As conditions worsened, the four-wheeled traffic and more-wheeled traffic sharing our road sped up. We took every safe opportunity to let them pass, but we were nearly run off the road for our courtesy. I've gotten a couple of questions and comments about what heated gear we were using on our ride, and since I'm doing a voiceover because of the lack of audio, I'll take a moment to discuss how our heated gear worked and what we were using. I was using the Kais system of heated gear that's available in the UK and Europe, while Shakedown was using a hot-wired heated vest that was available to him before the trip in the United States. On closer inspection, it seems that the Kais and the hot-wired are probably manufactured by the same company and are just sold under different brands. We got the impression of that, one, looking at the construction of them, but two, the inputs and the connectors. After seeing a picture of Shakedown's heated gear and the connection that he had sent me via email, I thought it looked as if the connectors were identical on the Kais and the hot-wired heated gear. I had done as much as I could to prepare the bikes prior to Shakedown's arrival so we could get right on the road and maximize our time traveling. So I took the chance and connected the battery lead to the BMW so we could avoid having to get under the panels and access the battery and put a new wire on the BMW. Luckily, that was the case, and the connections were identical. I'm not entirely sure that they're manufactured by the same company. However, they do share a lead, and they work pretty much identically to each other. I was riding with heated insoles in my boots that connected to wires that came down from my heated trousers, that connected to a wire to my heated long-sleeve jacket underneath my waterproof touring jacket. There are wires that come out of the sleeves that you could connect heated gloves to. The reason I didn't go with the heated gloves to complete the entire system was that the warnings inside the instruction booklet was not to put the heated gear directly against your skin, which would be unavoidable for the heated gloves. It was that concern that made me opt for and invest in the OEM Triumph heated grips that I put on the Street Cup. The BMW came from the factory with heated grips, which was a benefit. We also opted to put mitts on the ends of our handlebars like delivery guys or motorcycle couriers to try and trap some of that heat that the heated grips were emitting and to prevent any frostbite from the wind The only heated gear that Shakedown was wearing was the heated vest. His collar seemed to be heated, but he had no heated sleeves, no heated trousers, no heated insoles. For the most part, he seemed alright with the cold weather and the gear that he was wearing. He had a full adventure suit with thermal underwear and big thick socks, and I think some of the fairings and the windshield on the BMW also helped deflect some of the cold air that I was dealing with on the Naked Triumph. There was a couple of comments about cold toes, but other than that, it didn't seem that Shakedown was suffering too much, but maybe he was just keeping it to himself. Now, I am a huge fan of heated gear. I've never used it before, but after my experience on this Scotland ride, I will not be riding in the winter without my heated gear in the future. There is something to be aware of when you're riding with heated gear. Motorcycling requires the rider to employ all of their senses to safely operate the machine. The variety of sensory input that a rider experiences from smells and sounds and touch, they all determine how they'll act or react during a ride. To eliminate atmospheric conditions like temperature and humidity from the equation proved more disorienting than I had expected. Because I was warm and dry in my person, my brain determined that the road and atmospheric conditions were also warm and dry. Several times I found myself increasing speed and riding as if it were a spring afternoon, only to be reminded of the winter reality by feeling the bike slip drastically underneath me. The constant issues we had with our visors and helmets in dealing with the cold acted as a failsafe against completely ignoring the dangerous conditions through which we were riding. I was also convinced that the extra draw of the heated gear was demanding more from my bike and drastically affecting my fuel efficiency. My friend Costa told me before we left to never pass a petrol station while riding in Scotland. With the way the bike was gulping fuel, I was sure not to ignore his advice. It was when we stopped for fuel that we confirmed Shakedown's camera was dead and were presented with our next electronic failure. When Shakedown stopped his bike, he heard a sonar pinging noise, similar to something you'd hear from a submarine. He had made mention of a faint pinging noise or submarine sound or a sonar sound that he was hearing during our ride, but I chalked it up to the unsolicited occasional beeps I was getting from the Senna device that I was hearing. When we stopped for petrol, he thought that the bike was making this sonar pinging noise, and we tried to investigate. I knew that the bike couldn't be making that noise because the bike wasn't that sophisticated. This is a pre-computerized, I mean, there's a computer of sorts in it, but this is a pre-computerized motorcycle. That noise was not something the bike I knew was sophisticated enough to be making. It turned out to be his Samsung Galaxy S9 phone, which Shakedown was sure to tell me was an IP68 waterproof rating. He told me that was one of the highest waterproof ratings for electronic devices. He told me that he should have been able to drop his device into 1.5 meters of water and let it sit there for half an hour while still having it function. Unfortunately, the odd humidity of Scotland's weather was not something that the IP68 waterproof rating could contend with. That, combined with Shakedown's unease about the Amazon cables purchased to connect his phone to the bike, resulted in that sonar ping and an error on his screen saying that moisture was detected in his charging port. Despite the continuing electronic issues and the surmounting failures we were experiencing and the odd looks that we were getting from the locals at the petrol station, we filled up the bikes and we continued north. And it seems our Robin Redbreast friend was following us all the way. If you like that video and you want to see more like them, hit like, share, and subscribe.